They rode out onto the desert to camp. There was no wind, and the silence out there was greatly favored by every kind of fugitive, as was the open country itself, and no mountains close at hand for enemies to black themselves against. They were caught up and saddled in the morning before light, all riding together, their arms at the ready. Each man scanned the terrain, and the movements of the least of creatures were logged into their collective cognizance until they were federated with invisible wires of vigilance and advanced upon that landscape with a single resonance. They passed abandoned haciendas and roadside graves, and by mid-morning they had picked up the track of the Apaches again, coming in off the desert to the west and advancing before them through the loose sand of the river bottom. The riders got down and pinched up samples of the forced sand at the rim of the tracks and tested it between their fingers and calibrated its moisture against the sun and let it fall and looked off up the river through the naked trees. They remounted and rode on.
Hi, JVH.
Hi, Candy. How are you?
I'm okay. How's your winter storm?
Oh, it's pretty cold out here,
Were you,
and the
did you?
roads are terrible.
Oh, yeah, I bet it's pretty bad here, but I know it's much worse in Canada. You're in Ontario, I'm in Illinois. And I mean, Sunday was bad. Did you have to cancel any classes, physical, or did you have to go to remote or?
They didn't close down the
Okay.
school, so I couldn't cancel any classes.
Damn it.
Damn it. My students were probably cursing me inside
Yeah,
their hearts, you know, like,
yeah,
no, the roads have been kind of like pretty bad, but not totally undrivable.
yeah, yeah.
So
Was it
kind
two
of.
feet? 2 feet of snow?
Well, I saw a video in Toronto where like this 6'7" guy was like wandering in his backyard and he was like up to his waist. So
Yeah.
I think in Toronto got hit harder than
Yeah. My
here in the Southwest.
Yeah, my friend Eugene said it was 2 feet, so that sounded pretty bad. Well, we're here for another episode. We're going to talk about chapter 17, 16, chapter 16. I jumped
16,
ahead. 16.
16, 17, like
Yeah,
6'7".
6, 7. Yeah. Don't do that. Oh no, I think we did that last episode too. The-
That's for our preschool
That's
listeners.
right. Well, I guess first we want to say that we have an announcement that we have
Yes.
had a top secret project, the three of us, that's you, my husband Stag, and I have been working on since probably the end of November. November, or a few months anyway. And we have made a tarot card deck inspired by Blood Meridian. And, we've been sending pictures back and forth, sending notes, sending inspiration, and working on the images. And, we're ready to share it with the world. And I'd like to say that you could email us for details, bloodmeridiannow@gmail.com, if you are interested in getting this deck. And it's going to be $100 US, and that includes shipping and handling. It's going to be 125 in Canada, including shipping and handling. Email us, I think, is probably the best way instead of sending you to Substack, etc. But if you're listening to the podcast, yeah, email us, bloodmeridiannow@gmail, and we can start to work it out. Um,
Yeah,
and
and check out Substack and the Instagram page for images
we do
because
have some images.
this is an incredible, like it's a work of art. I mean, all 78 cards are
Mhm.
just absolutely stunning that you and Stag created. And, like I just gave you some conceptual ideas, like every once in a while. So I'm a minor element in the creation of these cards, but they are so incredible. I think we've both been kind of bursting to let the secret out and like tell everybody and get everybody interested. On the one hand, it's like it's just like it's an artwork you can own,
Mhm.
but I think, and maybe you could speak to this more, Candy. I think it's also like, we also sort of envisioned it as a practical tarot deck that you could use for, your normal tarot activities, like divining your situation and the potentialities in it and what you might be able to do. So it's also a meditative device, I think.
Oh yeah, it's definitely it is a meditative device. That's well said. I think it would be a great storytelling tool as well, which I mean, we haven't talked about this, but one of my theories is that Cormac used the tarot card to create Blood Meridian in some ways. I believe he did readings to write it. In fact, I am doing a roundtable in Albuquerque on that very topic, and we're going to compare it to Philip K. Dick using the I Ching to write, right, The Man in the High Castle. Is
Yes,
that
yes,
right? Yeah.
he,
So,
yeah.
yeah, we have a
Dick really
roundtable.
like started to hate the I Ching.
You did, or he did?
Dick did. Like
Oh,
he really started to resent it, like for the
oh,
decisions it was forcing him to make, and he felt it was almost like in typical Dick paranoid mystical fashion, was thinking it was sort of like a malevolent force in his life.
yeah.
But it's a pretty cool experiment.
It isn't a good experiment. I did the I Ching probably for a year. I had Young's book. He
Oh
did the
yeah,
intro
yeah, yeah.
for it. It's a pretty famous book. Oh my God, if I just saw the cover right now, I don't know how I would feel. But I was so engaged in it. It was crazy. But what happened was after about a year, I started to see the pattern. I saw the pattern. I think that's what Dick would probably feel, which is a kind of a strange feeling to feel that life might, I think you could find that in physics sometimes too, that there's an end game, that if we keep breaking things down to the smallest part. I mean, after a while, I was like, it was the combinations of mist, river, trees, mountains. You know what I mean? And it's like, at first, it's very helpful for your imagination to feel like, oh yeah, you have to pay the rent, or I'm dating somebody or something. I was in my 20s, and it was very helpful as a meditation tool. But I could definitely see as a storyteller, you would feel like, it could you could run out of options, or he was using it. You're not supposed to use it that much, I don't think. But a tarot card, I do love doing a tarot reading. I don't collect tarot cards, but I know a lot of people do. I mean, we have 3 or 4 decks. I have an Asha one. We have a pulp fiction one. Not Pulp Fiction the movie, but a pulp. Like
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
like
Like,
pinup girls and
like
stuff.
the
We have the
aesthetic.
classic one, yeah. And we had a Polish deck too. I mean, my husband's the one who really loves, he's the one who's kind of really into tarot. Um, but yes, so we created them one that a tarot reader will find content. There's motifs. You wouldn't have to know Blood Meridian to read these cards. They still have motifs and symbolism and evocative settings. As a Blood Meridian fan, I think you would have a lot of fun looking at them because, I shared the drawing. I've kept it limited because people will rip us off in terms of NFTs. The digital art and AI. I've been actually kind of concerned about that, and that's why we've kept it pretty under close wraps. And you kind of want someone who's a Blood Meridian fan. I want them to be surprised when they open up the deck and look at the pictures. But certainly, I have shared the one that's the Ain't That the Drizzling Shits. And there's a few cards where you can have fun trying to figure out what page it is in the book. So we
Nice.
put in that kind of a thing that it's not explained, but it's definitely things that come from the book, and some also aren't from the book. There's some elements of time travel in it, just like McCarthy did in Anachronisms. It's I consider it a literary criticism work, you know.
Right, yeah. I mean, Blood Meridian, as we've been discussing, like, it's a relational history, right?
Mhm.
Doesn't just isolate this moment in time in the middle of the 19th century, but it's using that moment in time to reveal something about our own present, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I'm teaching a seminar on Blood Meridian right now, and my students are sort of like kind of shocked about how applicable a lot of the things that are being talked about in Blood Meridian, like the Monroe Doctrine, for example, that these issues are still with us,
Mm.
unfortunately.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So, I mean, the tarot deck could be based on Blood Meridian. Blood Meridian being a relational text, it should have like some good temporal bandwidth in the deck itself that can reveal things about the readers present or the querents present.
Absolutely. It'll inform your reading of Blood Meridian. It'll inform your ideas of what it would be to be reading. And the cards, we even say that tarot cards are read. So there's a connection for sure, which I also can't help but think must have been important to a writer like McCarthy. Just that kind of phraseology. Anyway, so yeah, email us and we can give you the information to Venmo us and whatever. And hopefully you'll be interested in that. And
Yeah, the printing will be limited, so this is like an exclusive item, you know.
totally, totally.
Each deck will have that kind of Benjaminian aura to it that will give it lasting value.
That's right. That's right. So what do we think about this chapter 16?
Yeah, it's been, like it's taken us a while to get back together and, like everybody is so busy and but chapter 16 is like again, it's kind of like a modest chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it doesn't seem like a lot really happens in it, but nonetheless, I think it is kind of like a pivotal moment in the narrative, right? Like essentially like in this chapter, the Glanton gang are returning to the United States, basically like for the rest of the story. Like we've gone down into Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
We followed the kid and the gang down into Mexico, and we followed them like kind of up and down, like between the two countries. But now they're kind of going back into the States, and of course, they're on their way to Yuma, Arizona, where the Glanton gang will, meet its final fate. So not only like do we have a kind of now where most of the narrative will be back in America, but also it kind of, and it's very subtle, but it's essentially like they are now no longer scalp hunters in a way. This is sort of my reading of the chapter. Like in Samuel Chamberlain's My Confession, uh, Chamberlain kind of makes it clear that at some point, Glanton, basically abandons the commercial enterprise of collecting scalps, and he wants to go to California, as a gold seeker. We've been encountering gold seekers like throughout the novel, but this is in this chapter, in a way, it's sort of like not only are they back in America kind of permanently, or the plot or the scene of the novel is kind of back in America and the American Southwest, but also like it's kind of the end of the scalp hunting expedition. And it's not really registered at all in the novel. Now Glanton and his gang have decided not to do scalp hunting anymore, and it's nothing like that, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
McCarthy is too slippery and indirect to make any such crude sort of like telescoping announcements about the plot. But I think it's kind of interesting. They will encounter. They will encounter some Chiricahua Apache, and the Chiricahua, like basically like their traditional territory, kind of cross the nation-state boundary between Mexico and the U.S.
Mm.
So but it's not about like let's go collect their scalps or something like that anymore. And in fact, they're too evenly matched for the Glanton gang to consider attacking them. Instead, they have to make this kind of deal for whiskey. But like the scalp hunting days are over. And it's not really clearly put in the novel, but that's it. So like they've moved on in terms of employment. And now they're seeking something else. I don't know why. Like I don't know why, like historically, Glanton would have like quit at a certain point, because it was fairly lucrative. Obviously, like 250 US dollars or
Mm.
250 pesos for, the scalp of an adult male. That's a lot of money that
Mm.
he's walking away from, but maybe he's starting to consider that the risks outweigh the benefits or something. He's done a cost benefit analysis, and it's like
Yeah.
I think I'd rather, take the chance on mining for gold or digging for gold or whatever.
They've mentioned that there's a bounty on his head a couple of chapters ago, but it's not that he has noticed that there is one. But certainly you would think they would know they were in trouble. In this chapter, we've seen them go into another town, and the town seems to already know who they are. And so does this one. It seems like they're not particularly welcome. There's got to be a rumor factory going out there that these guys are just bad news. Um, yeah, I'm taken by something that you said. We do a pre-production uh, dialogue before we do our recording, and you've mentioned that the novel is coming. It's coming to a quiet. They're not scalp hunters anymore. I do have this overwhelming feeling that I've thought about is that we can tell the novel's winding down. It is winding down. It's coming to an end, and this chapter does seem to indicate there's a different vibe for sure. We've returned to the Carnival, like chapter 7 had our magicians, and this chapter is sort of filled with um, carnival poetics and and the anthropomorphic trees. We have trees that are naked or bare and bald and such that that haunting thing, and then the sideshow where that's not a good look either. It's kind of like the reality is that you're for sale. And sideshows were big back then. They did travel around. It was a big business. It was one of the few big businesses in America that you could have. And I noticed that this chapter started with two liftings. One, it starts with the lifting of a bull. The bull lifts up a horse and rider, and it ends with the judge lifting up a meteorite, and that's like a strongman show, right? This
Right.
lifting. Yeah,
Nice.
and
Yeah.
we have a fool in this chapter. We have several different motifs of Carnival in here. And the other thing I wanted to quickly before I forget was the jugglers are in chapter 7. Chapter 16, if you add 1 and 6 equals 7. I don't know if that means anything or not. I'm not into numerology, but I am into numerical composition. But chapter 7 is 7 chapters away from the beginning of the novel, and chapter 16 is 7 chapters away from the end of the novel. So it
Wow.
does have that feeling of chiasma. I'm
Yep.
using that word really, it's not my word. I'm learning that word, or palindrome, like Chris Forbes had said. And I wondered if Kelly James had noticed that with the 2 chapters as well. He's done a lot of stuff. He read the novel backwards. So I wonder, and I know he listens. So Kelly, get back to us on that one. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's like the novel is very symmetrical, right? And
it
even in
is.
the title, we have Blood Meridian or the Evening Redness in the West. So we're definitely in the evening redness of the West
Yes.
part of the novel,
Yeah.
like in terms of that symmetrical division of the novel, that I feel like is somewhere in chapter 12. Like chapter
Hmm.
12 has the two sections to the novel, and it's almost like perfectly divided
Mm.
in chapter 12, which is of course like one of the most horrific chapters. It's the scene of the massacre. Yeah, it's the massacre scene. But yeah, that's super interesting, and like the carnival show and the carnival spirit or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I really like the observation that the judge is a kind of a strong man. We have a kind of, the freak show
Hmm. Hmm.
element,
Hmm.
like with James Roberts and James Robert and his brother, Cloyce, I think. Is it? I think their last name is Bell or something like that.
Oh, okay.
Um, I might be wrong about that, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, it's funny, the strong man or strong boy, that's a motif in the Arne Thompson Uther classification index of folktales. It's a very strong formulae for storytelling of an unusual boy is born and he has an unusual strength and he becomes a hassle because he eats too much and he demands too much. I've always thought of the kid as that. Definitely the judge is, but I've placed the judge as a strong boy. Not the judge, the kid is a strong boy motif as well. I mean, we've watched him start to exceed and become very talented at hunting and trailing and tracking, surviving. He has a lot of skills, and yeah, that's just something to think about overall about the folktale motif that's in this as well. But yeah, the judge, I mean, we find out how strong he is. We definitely know who the judge is now in this novel. We know that he's very talented, he's very smart, and he's very dangerous. Um, I don't know what to make about that. And, and he has a bargain with Glanton that they watch each other. There's a lot of funny things in this chapter and a lot of like tension in this chapter. I wanted to remember some of the funny things because there's some funny lines. And there's also a Tarantino-like or
Yes.
Clint Eastwood energy of everyone's eyes looking at each other, cut to the eyes, cut to the frames, very cinematic tensions in this chapter as well.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned kind of doublings, the doubling of uh the bull on the horse, and then the judge with the stone. And there's also kind of another. It's also this chapter is also divided into two sections,
Mhm.
and there's also another kind of sort of doubling, like when they're riding following the course of the Santa Cruz, and they pass the old mission at San Jose to Tumacacori, and
Mm,
the judge wants to ride off and look at the church, right? And then they meet the two like German brothers or whatever in the church, and they've sort of lost their wits, and they they act like very disabled, I guess, or something like
mhm,
that. One of them is
mhm,
shot. One of them is caught in the rafters, and he's shot out of the rafters, which could be, I guess, comedic in some
Yep.
way, but maybe not in this particular setting. But and then his other brother, and they seem to have, so we have also this kind of like motif of um, disabling or disability
Mhm,
or something like that.
mhm,
And, maybe that is also kind of feeding into that the novel is winding down,
mhm,
um, or
mhm.
something like that.
Yeah.
And you,
Yeah.
you did mention the tension, right? And like when the judge wants to go see this old mission. And like he gives a kind of short disquisition on the history and architecture of the mission, such that like the people who are listening to him, you know, are amazed that he's actually never been there before, which
Hmm.
is a kind of echo of Chamberlain, right? In My Confession, Judge Holden of Texas finds out that Samuel Chamberlain is from Boston, and the judge describes Boston like even better than Chamberlain could, but he has not been there before, so that's a kind of like way in which Chamberlain sort of appears in this chapter.
Right.
But there's a as the judge sort of like fascinates at least three of the members enough that they go off with him to explore this mission.
Hmm.
It said that Glanton had dark misgivings. So
Hmm.
there's
Hmm.
tension between Glanton and the judge as well.
Yeah, I was wondering if part of that is we find out that Glanton is carrying a lot of money. So when three men leave the group of you, you're more vulnerable. I wonder if that's part of why he's having that misgiving and how dare the judge just be so cavalier and start sightseeing, right? Um, so part of the tension is that when they get involved with this other, there's a standoff with guys, and it seems to be fairly early in the dawn. And the people they encounter, they go, "What are in those bags?" And he goes, "Gold." And he's not lying about it. He knows they must know. And Glanton faces that. Um, and they get this tension where I'm feeling like all of a sudden, like the gang is very vulnerable. They've lost some men. The Delawares are gone now, right? We have a very terrible scene where some of the guys have been killed off in the gang and they're hanging from trees. And the description's pretty awful. Um, Upside
Yeah,
down, hanging in trees, blooding out.
like
And
the hangman and the tarot deck.
correct, like the hangman in the tarot deck. And, um, you just start feeling like they shouldn't separate. In a way, Glanton's right. The judge is being cavalier. And they do make their way into this town and they demand food, of course, and a place to stay. And there's a shootout where they ask, there's a lot to do with race in this chapter too. I think you would agree. Um, there's some language in here we don't like. We don't like the imbecile, the disability of this one child, who he's probably about 30. He's a grown up, but he still seems like a child. Um, and his brother. Then they describe the Apaches, they say words like jackal warriors, which seems like it could be inappropriate to me. Wild dog warriors, they're called, and I'm not, I don't feel that's positive. Um,
Well, for sure. I mean, in terms of the first set of quote unquote imbeciles, as they're these two brothers who are kind of like very strange or whatever in this church, and one of them is shot dead, and the other one is wearing weird clothing that they've
mm,
stitched up. It's as if they've been there for way
mm,
too long, and they've kind of lost their minds. Yeah, Glanton says, I should have shot the other one too because I don't like to see white men that way,
mhm,
Dutch or whatever. I don't like to see it.
mhm,
Um, like then later we're going to have this scene in a tavern or whatever where the judge and the gang are kind of talking with Cloyce about James Roberts, and the judge kind of performs a phrenological
That's
examination,
right. Yes.
and actually like phrenology as a kind of quote unquote science in
Mm,
the 19th century was like deeply tied to kind of uh, notions of race and
yes.
like the problem with like American race science, I guess, in
Yeah.
the 19th century, they had to fight against the account of the origin of humanity in the Bible, right? In the Bible, all of humanity is created at once, so there's a single origin for
Mm,
all human beings. But of course, like because of the structure of American society, that it was a slave-holding society, so there was the enslavement of Africans and African Americans, and because American expansion of territory required the genociding of different indigenous peoples. Race science in the 19th century started flirting with the idea of what they would call a polygenetic account of the origin of the human species, because they needed to organize different quote unquote races hierarchically
mm,
to explain why enslave these people, why genocide these people. Well, blacks needed to be enslaved because they were mentally inferior, and indigenous people needed to be, you know, hounded out of their traditional territories or put in reserves or otherwise, genocided again because they were only partially human. And the only way, so there was no real redemption for African Americans, but there was, the possibility of redemption for indigenous if they would assimilate to white society. So,
mm,
like, phrenology was kind of like, let's look at how big skull cases are and let's look at different, parts of the skull and the brain and let's measure brain sizes, like of course like race scientists thought that other than white, and white would mean like not only English and British but also Germanic and et cetera, et cetera.
mhm,
Like whites had bigger brains than blacks. And let's prove this, through measurement of skulls and the way skull formations looked like. And it kind of reminds me of like Zora Neale Hurston, who became an anthropologist like in the early part of the 20th century. One of her first assignments as a fresh anthropology PhD student, or maybe it was after her PhD, she had to go around New York City measuring the skulls of black folks, right?
mm,
Like,
mm. Well, one of the ways they measured was they took the skull and they had these little beads, like pieces of iron balls, like marbles, tiny marbles, and they would literally count the cavity. And the theory was that the bigger the cavity, the smarter the person was. Complete bullshit. I read actually Time's Arrow, I think it was Time's Arrow by Stephen Jay Gould. He really talks about that. But complete bullshit. There's no correlation, you know? Uh, I guess life would be a lot easier if there was. Yeah,
definitely.
so there is that kind of there is a lot of hierarchy and an uncomfortable narrator language in this for sure. Um and then lots of beautiful language. Um we get that kind of I wanted to talk about some of the funny bits in the chapter too. I'm just gonna That was so beautifully said, but I wanted to remember that. I love that when they have the gang is standing there in front of people and they have to make a bargain, and the bargain is somebody wants whiskey. And we're like, we don't have whiskey. And it says, in truth, they did not look like men who might have whiskey they hadn't drank. I thought that was just hilarious. There's a
Yeah.
judge defending Glanton, as you said, and when he meets them, he touches his head and he realizes he doesn't have a hat. He is mimicking in a way the kid's paraphernalia when the kid had plants on his head and leaves and mud, and the judge has also done that. That's an interesting, very subtle
Yes.
relationship between them, and it
Yeah.
reminds me again of the Green Man. You know, the Green Man has the plants coming out of their heads of a type of art history. Um, and
It's not,
Glanton,
it's, oh,
huh?
sorry, go ahead, go,
No, I
please.
just wanted to say too, also another funny line to me is when Glanton says, "Where is this puke hole?" I don't know. I just find that really funny. Maybe I'm just immature. But you know,
No, no.
when a shithole is a shithole, you know?
Yeah, you'd
Um,
call it by its name.
yes, there's also a bizarro world where there's like a double to the judge. It's a massive guy with cut off overalls, red checkered shirt, and kerchief. And this is like a hee-haw TV show character or something, like caricature. And it that again seemed very to me. I didn't know that there was, I guess I knew there would be overalls, but somebody would cut them off and dress
Right.
like that seems to me like a joke. I wouldn't have thought that would be correct historically, but what do I know? You know.
Was that when the judge was trying to recruit people for the goldfields?
Oh, it's possible. It's possible. You know, something else was weird. You're talking about the boy and the imbecile, you know, as he's called, um, with his disability. Um, I guess Glanton or something. One, they think that like he's in a cage and he's covered in shit and he's not being treated well. And I think Glanton says, you know, in California they tar and feather you for that. And the guy goes, "Oh, I've been that." In
Yeah.
Arkansas. It's
I
just
mean,
so I had to go look up tar and feathering. I really didn't know it was a real thing.
oh
I thought
yeah, yeah,
I thought it was
absolutely.
like just a weird like from a comic book or something, you know?
That was a terrible thing. And I mean, I guess maybe this reveals my own immaturity, but
Mm.
I also found the line about James Roberts silently chewing on a turd kind of funny. Like,
Yes,
it's
yes, it's funny,
like
not funny, it's
absolutely
horrible.
disgusting.
It is. It is and really why are we blaming ourselves? It's in the novel. I mean, it's these
But as
descriptions
an,
are bringing it out of us.
it is an image, right?
Yes.
That the writer is shoving in our faces, and
Yes.
which there's so much that could be taken as satirical in this novel, and
Definitely. And also
uh,
realistic. You know, I lived in a group home when I was young, who just, kind of a late teenager, and with Down syndrome kids and autistic kids. And, oh my God, it was just such a great memory. I loved them all so much. But sometimes this one guy, he would get mad at me, one of the kids, and he was like 9 years old. He was on the spectrum. He'd get pissed at me and he would leave his shit on the counter in the bathroom. I'd be like, what? And I had to act, I just, I'm loving, I'm caregiving, but I'd be like, okay, message loud and clear. So, I mean, these things do happen.
they happen
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
I wanted to it's not really funny, but it's kind of like beautiful or
Mm,
like great storytelling, and also like very indicative of the kind of storytelling that we get in this novel. This is back to these two brothers, and the one who is shot out of the rafters.
hmm
As he's dying, we read he had one arm lying in his groin, and he moved it slightly and pointed. And then there's this great sentence, at them, or at the height from which he had fallen, or to his destination in eternity, they did not know, period. Then he died, period. Right? Like, so this gesture, right? Like the man is pointing, and
mm.
the narrator doesn't know, right? And it could be this, or it could be that, or it could be this. Here's a use of the conjunction or as an exclusive disjunction. Um, it's just a beautiful sort of, again, like everything is objective, right? Like, so the narrator does not care to to know what is going on in the mind of the dying man, and like so it's just like this beautiful ambiguous gesture. I thought
Hmm.
I really like that one. Um, and of course,
Hmm.
I like the passage that we read at the beginning of the episode.
Hmm.
Again, it's sort of like and we probably will talk about this more in a bit, but this description of the gang as a kind of, they're all attuned to each other. They're federated with invisible wires of vigilance and advanced upon that landscape with a single resonance. Actually, there's a really lovely poetic, we move from cognizance to vigilance to resonance. It's a very like beautifully written sentence, but
Hmm.
this kind of like glorified idea of the gang as this super organism that is so attuned to each other that they're this incredible war machine that it's really like a beautiful image
Hmm.
um, in beautiful language. But of course, and we'll talk about this later, I think, we always have to resist I feel like we have to resist the beauty of the prose, uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
really kind of
Hmm.
understand like who is being talked about and
Yeah.
like who are these characters. Later, we'll talk about this too, like about when um, Owens is shot, right? In that moment where he wants Jackson to sit at a different table because
Yes.
and so like we have this murder, and
Hmm.
then of course like the local authorities come to the gang after they've moved to another puke hole,
Hmm.
and basically they lie, they deny,
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
lie over and over and over again, and you know it's obvious they killed him,
Yeah.
but they lie their way out of it. And speaking about resonance with the present,
Yep.
like we have to keep in mind like this present example of what's going on in Minneapolis when
Hmm.
everybody knows the truth because there are the cameras to show
Yep.
it.
Yep.
The official statements coming out of
The
the White
fucking
House,
lying cracker.
which is lying, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so I think it's important to keep in mind like the Glanton gang are as brutal and as horrible and as protestable
Mm.
as the thugs that are terrorizing the cities in your country.
Hmm. Hmm. And written in a way that the humanity sometimes touches us. I think that, with Glanton, sometimes I feel there is that kind of regret. Definitely with the kid. Some kind of karma might be building up, not with the judge. Like, I don't know when we're going to talk about evil, maybe next episode, but I'm starting to kind of think about the evil I want to talk about with the judge, but maybe not right tonight. Um, today, this recording. Like, I'm like,
This
God, it's
morning,
nighttime. It's actually not nighttime when I said tonight. Yeah, it's it is. I love that part where the judge starts defending him. I think that's just an incredible part of like that bullshit line again, where he goes on about, and this is why the judge can be appealing, is that he's so intelligent, he can get them out of trouble. He can make the gunpowder. Now he can talk his way out of a problem. I mean, what are what are those bounty hunters supposed to think when he's got them twisted up in legalese, you know? And
exactly. It is a
yeah,
kind of comedic,
it
almost comedic
is.
sort of moment where you have somebody confusing somebody else with their with
Yeah,
by kind of talking circles around them.
absolutely. Glanton gets me because in this chapter two, we know he loves his dog. He sees dogs part of this sideshow thing. There's these dog freaks, and maybe we're going to call this episode "Dog Freaks." I don't know. But there's a
I think you just
six-legged,
I
a
think you
six.
just
I
named
think we
the
just did six-legged dog and a or no, yeah, six-legged dog, a six-eyed dog. And you're like, what the hell? I mean, there is such a thing. I mean, I did Google it. I had to find out, is that actually possible? I think there also is, the other funny part is, in terms of McCarthy, we know now he really loved cars. There's a motor company with a six-legged dog. It's just, and Romulus and where's Rom?
Remus.
Yeah. Don't they have a number of legs too? Are they attached? I don't know.
I don't
And
know, but
I don't know either. And then the six-eyed dog is really, you call that the brown eyebrows on like a Rottweiler. They're not really four eyes, not six eyes, four eyes. It's almost like calling somebody with glasses four eyes, only it's their eyebrows. I don't think it's really a dog with four eyes.
well, you know what? Like
Maybe.
this makes me sort of regret not preparing better for the
Oh,
for the episode, and maybe I can make it up to the listener by bringing some material next episode. But the dog freaks,
yeah.
I feel like this actually is a kind of attenuated allusion to Michael Ondaatje's The Collected Works of Billy the Kid.
Oh,
Because
interesting.
so like I feel like
Hmm.
either was it Dennis McCarthy or has
Yeah.
Cormac McCarthy himself said talked about Michael Ondaatje's,
Oh,
The
oh
Collected
well,
Works of
he
Billy the
did
Kid?
in Brick magazine. He talks about reading on Donchi for sure, which I was
Yes.
always very proud of. I found that article, that interview, because I was involved at Coach House Press at the time. But
Right.
yeah, he's talking to Leon Rook, and he does talk about reading on Donchi, and I think Billy the
Well,
Kid does
there
come
are
out.
dog freaks. There are like
Oh,
freak,
freaky
bred
dogs.
dogs
Yeah,
in near the end of the collected works of Billy the
yeah.
Kid. I don't have it on me, so
Mhm.
I could easily
Right.
read it, but yeah, they're there. So that could actually be, like a little literary nod to uh,
Yeah, I like
a,
that.
a kind of obscure literary Western.
I like that. And I think the thing with Dennis is that he wrote about the Gospel According to Billy the Kid, a book I highly recommend if I haven't recommended it to anyone listening now. Cormac's, what are the chances of two brothers being very good writers?
Yeah.
But it did happen. And, Dennis has written all his life. He was practicing law himself and involved with many organizations where his work was dependent on his good writing. And I do recommend that novel. Um, yeah, so he loves these dogs, and it bothers him to see the dogs having disabilities. It bothers him to see this man having disabilities. And at one point the caged man, he talks to the caged, he's caged by his brother to travel. They drag him along behind horses. And and he says, and the brother says, well, he was born that way. And Glanton goes, were you? And it's just such a funny, sarcastic riff when Glanton, were you? And it could slip by in the chapter so easily, some of these very funny things. Again, those are super cinematic and they would really bring to a script. They're very
Yes.
good. Yeah. Very good. Where is this puke hole? You said something about and this won't be, we won't finish on this note either here because we have it coming up in the next chapter, a particular term that really is a window into analyzing the way blood meridian functions and looks. But we've had a couple of terms come up in this chapter, and I've got a little list of them, and I guess we'll save it to talk about with the next chapter. But that idea of the non-duality amongst the gang, that they are working as one entity. And there's a couple of, we had a word, we had a phrase last chapter and two or three this chapter that are going to tie right into the next chapter that might be worth noticing. I've got them written down. I don't know where I put them, but they're there. I've got them somewhere, and they're going to go with the next chapter too. But I love that. I love that. What about, oh, listen, I don't want to forget either. We're kind of jumping. This is a very scattered episode, I think. When he's arguing and defending Glanton in his lawyer speak, he mentions a couple of people. This is where Cormac McCarthy, he mentions Anna Axamir. How do you say that?
An
Oh,
accident.
Coke. Yeah, Anna Axamander, Thanos, Blackstone, and Coke. Cormac McCarthy manages to get the word Coke into Blood Meridian, which is astounding to me. That's just astounding. He has the word Coke in 18 of his projects, at least. And even in from the counselor, there's the guy when he's drinking a Coke when he spreads the wire across the road to kill the Green Hornet on the motorcycle. Here it's 1849 and he finds a way to have Coke. He had gotten a grant from the Lyndhurst Foundation in 1979, I think, or 1978. And if you go to the website of the Lyndhurst Foundation, one of the people involved in the um, Lyndhurst Foundation was a creator of Coke. He was involved in the Coca-Cola company. So he gets this grant, which was $20,000 a year for 3 years. And I guess McCarthy, we have to imagine that he's going to put product placement in his novels for the rest of his life. It must have been such a significantly, he apparently was very, very needy of it right at that time. At that point, he does start to get more grants and more fame, especially after Blood Meridian and building up to All the Pretty Horses. But it's kind of amazing that.
It's funny, yeah. I mean, the you know the that the word Coke could be also like in the reading of in the context of reading this novel, like post 1985. Obviously, like when you see that word, you might just automatically first and foremost think of Coca-Cola rather than Sir Edward Coke, an influential English jurist from the 16th century, 16th, 17th century.
Yeah, yeah,
But like it is that is a really funny line, and again, I don't feel super adequate to talk to it, but I'm gonna try.
yeah.
So like Coke and Blackstone are two jurists in English common law history. So so in a way, it makes sense for the judge to be quoting, um, you know, legal scholars in like again lying his way out of like being held accountable for the murder of Owens. So it makes sense to quote, law scholars when you're talking about law, but then to quote like two pre-Socratic Greek philosophers, Anaximander and then Thales. Thales being kind of like the very first, kind of like in general the first of the pre-Socratics, philosophers who like were kind of looking for how to account for the unity of all things. So, of course, Thales is the guy who said everything is water, which maybe is more appropriate in Sutri than in Blood Meridian or something like
Mhm.
that. But why would you quote Thales? Who like I think he's also, there's that kind of anecdotal story about Thales who was looking up at the stars and he fell into a well or something like that. So the kind of like cliched stereotype of the philosopher with their head in the clouds type of thing. But
Hmm.
also he was the one who kind of started to think about what is the underlying substance of the world, like the question will be what is being?
Hmm.
But Anaximander is also like to me this is quite interesting and I'm gonna I guess I'm gonna assume that as he was writing this he wasn't just like pulling out names from his memory of pre-Socratics, but he maybe wanted the nerdy reader to like look a little bit deeper into
Mm.
the names that he's mentioning. And like I don't think there is a lot of text preserved of Anaximander. Like I think maybe like in there's definitely a sentence that has been sort of preserved in another later writer's account, Simplicius. And the sentence from Anaximander is in kind of like a English translation of Nietzsche's German translation of the original Greek.
Huh.
uh, they must pay penance and be judged for their injustice according to the order of time. And so like, of course, I probably, always am talking about Walter Benjamin even on this podcast. And so the idea like that they must pay penance and be judged for their injustice according to the order of time is a kind of conception of history, like how does history happen? And, like at least a philosopher of history like Benjamin would say that, history doesn't occur from cause and effect. You can't say like historical incidents are, that one thing causes another.
Mm.
Rather, there, historical events are involved with one another in a kind of structure of guilt and retribution or debt and payback, so they must pay penance and be judged for their injustice. In other words, like everything that lives lives by the injustice of having to destroy other things in order to come to be in the first place. So there's a kind of metaphysical idea of history as guilt history. But of course, like also like here, as we're nearing the end of the novel and we're nearing like the basically the end of the Glanton gang first, and then like all of it kind of in a series of increase
Mhm.
like of deaths. We'll get Glanton dying. Well, we'll get Jackson dying, Glanton dying. Eventually, we're gonna have Toadvine die,
Mhm.
and then we reach the culmination of the last encounter between the judge and the kid in Fort Griffin. And, obviously you could read that encounter as signaling the kid's death, although it's like a little bit obscure.
Mhm.
So we have this kind of, they must pay penance and be judged for their injustice. Like this is the time when they are done killing and they are starting to be killed off one by one.
Mhm.
So, in a way, quoting Anaximander, like at this point late in the novel, is also kind of like an interesting little signal of, they have incurred a great debt,
Mhm.
and now it is time for
Mhm.
payback. But, and then maybe more broadly speaking, you know, we can think of the relationship of the historical moment that Blood Meridian aestheticizes in relation to the moment in which Blood Meridian was written. What is the relationship between 19th century America as the frontier is finally being closed and the geographical boundaries of the nation state are reaching their, you know, stable form,
Mhm.
and McCarthy's present of the late 20th century, or even our present of the 21st century. We have to think about the relation between different historical moments, perhaps in terms of guilt and retribution and debt and payback. But that is like for Walter Benjamin, like, and I don't know. I hope I'm not being too abstract or whatever. But for Walter Benjamin, this is a kind of a pagan notion of time, and as opposed to kind of a moral or ethical time. Because nobody regrets what they do. Nobody, there's no moral conversion. Not even the kid.
Mhm.
Kid does not like after he leaves the Glanton gang, he just drifts, and like even more so, the judge's appearance is actually kind of predicated on how the kid treats Elrod.
Mhm.
Like so, the kid does. I'm gonna argue at least as one possibility of reading the novel that the kid does not change.
Mhm.
So he has not undergone any kind of moral conversion, and he will meet his end, as payback for the debt that he has incurred, and he is being judged for the injustice he participated in.
Well, yeah, I think I would agree with a lot of that. I don't think he changes moral character. I don't think that any of them do. Certainly the judge doesn't. If he changed moral character, it was before we met him. He may have started out as an innocent, well-adjusted human being. Can you say the quote by NEX Bender again, please?
Yeah, they must pay penance
Uh-huh.
and be judged for their injustice according to the order of time. Now, it's not just like if you do something wrong, you're going to pay for it at one moment or another. Rather, coming into existence and becoming, the process of Genesis
Mm-hmm.
is kind of, has its complement with the process of perishing. Everything that comes into being must also perish because coming into being is a kind of injustice.
Mm-hmm.
Because how do you come into being? How do you maintain your being? You eat other
Yeah.
beings that were once alive, right? Even if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, you're still eating plant matter.
Yes.
Life lives off of death, and so from this, so there's a broad way of interpreting Anaximander's sort of like the one sentence that seems to have survived all, the passage of time. That broad sense, but of course there's a
Mhm.
narrower sense too that we can apply to the novel. Like there have been horrible injustices committed like by all of the gang members this every day of their waking lives as they're with each other,
Mhm.
and one by one they're being paid. And but also, it's not as if they're seeking to escape payback, like in a way, like there's a kind of sense that, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. And, these guys are enlightened or endarkened enough
Mhm.
to like accept that, right? Except for the judge. The judge does not want to die by the sword, but he does want to live by the sword. He wants to
Yeah.
live forever.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So he wants to escape
Mhm.
the guilt that he is continually
Mhm.
incurring
Mhm.
with all of his, horrible crimes.
Mhm. Um, Something I thought about when you say time, because for me, this novel has time factoring in it. And Annie Axmaner brought the gnomon to his community, which was a Greek invention, I suppose. Well, it really comes from stupas. There's many gnomons, but the gnomon is on the sundial or on a stupa, the part that reads the sun, right? Reads the is able to be a time factoring thing. It's the top of it that casts a shadow, if you will.
Right.
And so that's kind of interesting to me. And then the time factoring, even with the evening redness in the sun, tells us that this novel has something to do with time and direction and navigation,
Absolutely.
in my
Yes.
opinion, right? And so I find that really interesting. There's something else a little bit about time was that at one point they used the word, and I thought this was incredible, and it was also humorous to me, lemniscate. At the end
Right.
of the barrel of the rifle, the lemniscate is an infinity symbol, and it just hit me so intensely this reading about how crazy that was. While you're looking at the end of the gun that's going to kill you, you're seeing your death or your infinity or the you're gone to glory
That's right.
or
Yeah.
your finiteness. Maybe this is over. And I just thought that was very sublime.
That is an incredibly beautiful metaphor, like for the barrel of a shotgun, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we know from McCarthy's interest in like the gun making
Hmm.
uh, article in the Foxfire magazine, where he got the idea for the judge's making of the gunpowder in chapter 10, that story that Tobin recounts.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, like in that article in Foxfire and gun making, the author's like this, the guns are works of art, right? But they
Yeah.
are lethal works of art,
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
the lemniscate symbol reminds me of a professor I once had,
Yes.
who lived on a street and his house number was 1008, and
Oh,
he
yeah.
went up on a ladder and he actually like tilted the eight so it became a lemniscate.
Oh, I love that. So cool. That's a great idea. Well, for those who think we're a little bit crazy here and thinking about the lemon skate or gnomons, basically, if you look at a globe, the globe that you get of the world, right? You might spin it on your desk, or maybe it's your bar if you're Hugh Hefner. But the path the sun marks on Earth's movement is on the globe, and it's a figure eight. It's a lopsided figure eight, but it's that important, and it's traveling the evening redness in the west, to somewhere, everywhere. It's got that same path. So that little figure eight shows up. The words I was thinking of earlier, the little phrases that you mentioned, which made me think about the group, was collective cognizance, you said, right? Each obscure soul was enveloped in audible shapes of light. That was in the previous chapter.
Right, yes.
Um, Audible shapes of life, that's
Bullshit.
synesthesia, it's very died impartially. And the next chapter, we're going to come in and we're going to have four terms that really are building up in this novel to the kind of world you're entered in this novel and what life is and what we sort out of it and why navigation or gnomons or our time factoring might be so important because we're in this kind of visual chaos, if you will, potential visual chaos. I wanted to thank Wes Morgan quickly because the Coke thing, I emailed him a while. You know, any history you read about pretty much that's been um in academia, Wes Morgan has done so much on the history of Cormac McCarthy, just in Knoxville on anything. And he's the one who told me to go look at the website of the Lyndhurst Foundation, that I would see something interesting there about Coca-Cola. And so I just want to thank him for that. And it was really what I found was it had the Lyndhurst Foundation that gave him money had its beginnings in the broad local and regional philanthropic activities of Carter Lupton, a pioneer in the Coca-Cola bottling business. And I mean that gives me endless entertainment. And Blood Meridian's the first time he mentions Coke in his work, I believe. He didn't mention it before, and it was probably after he.
He doesn't mention it in Suttree?
I don't think he does, but I'll go. Maybe he's got cola in there, and I'm counting sometimes when he says cola. Maybe he does have it in Sundry.
Yeah, well, maybe not
Oh, you
though.
know what? You're
Suttree always ate or drank chocolate milk or something like that. I don't know. Like he always is eating hamburgers and chocolate milk or something.
right.
I'd be wrong about that. But
I
yes,
don't know.
speaking of like debts and stuff like that,
Yes, yes,
all McCarthy scholars owe a great debt to the work of Wes Morgan.
absolutely. And what a great person too. It really does. And people sometimes they've written whole papers with information he's given them and whole books. He's a very generous scholar as well, and deserves a lot of credit. What else? I know we have more here.
Well, there's lots more.
I know
Like
it's never going to end, right?
you were mentioning that there kind of like there's a little bit of talk about race and like the shadow of race is kind of cast over this chapter a little bit. And of course, like, when Owens demands that Jackson sit at a separate table, and the gang basically just laughs,
Yeah.
right? It's a kind of, again, like, and the gang is this, super organism federated by invisible wires. There is a kind of utopian element to the gang's togetherness, right? And that
Yeah.
which transcends racial boundaries that are otherwise like very firmly set in the context of 1850 or whatever.
Hmm.
There's something like again like that's like the craziness of the novel in many ways. Like there are utopian elements in like all of the horror that is happening. And um, if I were to say, like, if I were to try to define, like, the writing itself, like literature being a species of rhetoric, and, the particular kind of rhetoric that literature, sprang from was, epideixis, or the rhetoric of praise. And so we have this kind of praise rhetoric, that amplifies and sort of like gigantifies the gang and all their, doings, and that kind of draws the reader in and seduces the reader to, like cheer for and maybe even identify with in different ways
Mm.
with the characters. Um, but, in a way, the rhetoric of praise is kind of paradoxical, right? Because it's sort of like praising something that actually should be censured, right? Like, I mean, most sort of like you know politically correct accounts of history would kind of say what an awful time this was, what awful like people were involved in the scalp hunting industry, and of course that's true.
All
Right.
right.
But the fact that McCarthy uses a kind of paradoxically um, praise rhetoric is very challenging. Is one of the ways in which the novel is very challenging, and I would call this novel a kind of interrogative text.
Mm.
Drawing from the 1980s literary critic Catherine Belsey.
Mm.
This is a text that kind of judges you your interpretation of the text is also the text judgment on you. Like how you take this text is saying something about you. So like,
Absolutely.
um, you know, readers beware, text,
Yeah.
um, and study it deeply or just avoid it altogether.
Yeah, it's I guess like a Rorschach, you're bringing sometimes it's so infinite, which I had mentioned earlier was it's so infinite and layered. It's I would say it's we've talked about Baroque and in the art realm, Baroque is very floral and decorative, but there's also another thing called horror vacui, which is fear of empty space. And I think the novel is definitely fear of empty space. It's just so layered with meaning, motifs, descriptions that it can be exhausting to read. And you definitely, there's something for everybody. I want to do a correction. Coke is mentioned in Suttree, so he probably got that grant before, just at the time Suttree was going. Yeah, if he got it in 79 or 78, something like that. Anyway, I guess or he knew it was coming. It's like 9 times. So maybe it's in all of his books. I mean, obviously he really liked Coca-Cola.
Maybe it's just like
Yeah.
Coke. Yeah.
Um, Speaking of the words, and we're talking about when I said I was uncomfortable, Tonto is twice in Blood Meridian. That's also really that did surprise me because I just thought even in Blood Meridian's time you wouldn't say that. But it goes in with all the other language that's in there as well. It's
Well, I mean, the one mention of that word that I am recalling offhand is the narrator seems to claim that other indigenous groups called certain indigenous groups that word
yeah,
Tonto.
foolish. It means foolish.
As
Yeah,
it means foolish, I see,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It's sort of again like the word Apache is like an indigenous word for enemy, right? So it's not to say that there was no tension or that it was
Mm,
all harmony and
mm,
holding hands together among different indigenous
mm,
nations. That's
mm,
also not true, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Sure.
But
Yeah.
like maybe the other kind of thing, like so in my my seminar, we're just like
This is for Blood Meridian?
yeah, in
Yes.
my seminar we this week actually, I think it was just yesterday.
Yeah.
Every day seems like a week.
Oh.
Yeah, yesterday we were talking about the title and the three epigraphs,
Mm-hmm.
and so that gave me an excuse to go back and reread Yakobuma's six theosophic points, or at least the sixth point, from which the epigraph is extracted, about
Mm-hmm.
the life of darkness and all that sort of stuff. And it's just really like, you know, Boehme's like book is kind of, like Hegel thought Boehme was like the first of the German philosophers because he introduces a kind of concept of subjectivity in philosophy, which is very German.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you look inside and there's the abyss, right? And there's also like darkness inside and there's light inside, and those worlds are eternal and blah, blah, blah. And, Boehme talks about the natural elements in the world of darkness. And these are, the kind of um, traditional sins, right? Like you have pride, you have covetousness, you have envy, and then you have anger. And the way Burma describes, like, these are all kind of, traditional deadly sins, right? And so Burma describes kind of like how pride is the first and foremost of the elements in the dark world, and pride is like the desire to be supreme above everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And that naturally leads to covetousness, to wanting everything.
Yeah.
And of course, because you can't have everything, nobody can have everything, because there is no center to the world, but there are multiple centers. That leads to envy, right? Because you envy the things you can't have,
Mm.
and then envy is, of course, the feeling of impotence, which wounds your pride, and then you that gives way to anger, and anger gives way to violence. And this beautiful kind of concatenation of elements, slash deadly sins,
Mm-hmm.
is, all of these, the more you indulge in the dark world and its elements of pride and covetousness and envy and anger, the more you are given over to falsehood, to lying, right? And of course, and the judge is like the preeminent liar in this text. And it's just, when I read the judge lying about, or everyone lying about, we didn't kill this man, and then the judge kind of like using like confusing legalese to basically lie himself out of being held responsible for this murder. Like it just sort of makes me think that again, like there's more Burma in here than just like the little epigraph, and that there is a kind of like question, about darkness in here. And
Mm-hmm.
giving into darkness, you become a figure, and figure is a very, like a kind of typological word. You become a figure of the real evil that dwells in the dark world. And so, also, like, it's really funny to think about, like pride,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to be supreme. I can't help but think of, the president of the US,
Mm-hmm.
covetousness, wanting to own everything and possess everything. That also describes,
Yeah.
to a T, and like envy, and then anger, and
Nobel
violence.
Peace Prize. Yeah.
It's just like, it's like Burma still is like applicable, and like so there might be a kind of like, what is the ethics of Blood Meridian? Like
Mm-hmm.
early readers thought that this was a nihilistic text,
Mm-hmm.
that it was pure nihilism.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I don't. The Burma epigraph sounds cool, right? Like
Yeah.
the very life of darkness, there is no sorrowing. And so, like somebody like Petra Mundik would say, the way that McCarthy arranges the epigraph makes it think that the novel is praising all the evil deeds that it that it
Mm-hmm.
records, right? But if the epigraph not only says something about the novel, but also like tells the reader to go to the original source and read Boma, and then like take that knowledge back to your interpretation of the knowledge, then there might be some kind of like ethics that is rubbing against the grain of the kind of nihilism that is on the surface of the novel. I don't know, like,
Well, interesting. We so carry on.
yeah, it's just like I'm just really interested in how lying works.
Yeah,
In this novel, like in this novel, lying is treated as a serious metaphysical issue. But I
absolutely.
also, I also like, I teach and love to think about comedy, right? And like
Mhm.
comic characters are typically liars, right?
Yeah.
But they lie, like comic lying is actually kind of significantly different, I think, from the lying that the judge does. I could be wrong about that. I'll have to think about it more, but.
Yeah.
But it's like the seriousness with which this novel treats falsehood, I think. And the judge is obsessed with falsehood too, right? It's like there are false dancers and there are true
Mm-hmm.
dancers. There are
Mm-hmm.
false books and there are true
Mm-hmm.
books. So he is obsessed with this kind of continuum between truth and falsehood. So there's more to probably be said about this.
Well, yeah, and I think, this does hint at some things I was saying. Would we be talking about this today or not? But we've started it, so let's keep going just for a second. I won't take up too much more time, but, in the way that early critics thought the novel was nihilistic, it swung to the other way, and people interpret it as Gnostic. That is also incorrect. Because what we're seeing is examples of non-duality. I mentioned that before in those phrases that you read, and we're going to hear another phrase that's non-dual in the next chapter. And the thing is, Gnosticism is about having the experience and understanding that it's non-duality, that the world is non-dual. But the problem with Blood Meridian is that it's neo-Gnostic because it does take the side of dualism, and it does remain in duality. It comes back to duality, is one of the reasons why it's neo-Gnostic. And the judge, to me, we found out that there's a girl missing in this chapter. I think most of us reading the book now would know that he's killed her. And he's a pedophile, he's a murderer, he's a real Harvard type. And then in the archives, McCarthy describes the judge as Gestalt evil. To me, he holds the brother the dis disabled um fool or child or imbecile head like an immense and dangerous faith healer. And that is what he is. He is kind of like a dangerous faith healer. For me, the definition of him being evil is I truly believe that the judge is enlightened. But what he is in his enlightenment is he's chose to use that to his advantage, to gain, to tell lies, to out trick people, like you said. That's how he uses lying in his enlightenment. He does know the truth, and he knows the nature of existence, and yet he chooses to not have compassion and not live that way. He chooses not to be Gnostic. He's had the Gnostic experience, and he chooses not to be. And he is the really the personification of neo-Gnosticism. Um, and there's more on that, but I do think for me the evil is that he has seen the truth of reality. He's seen the nature of reality, and he's chosen that it's going to be his advantage. And I mean, many bad guys are like that. Mephisto is like that too, where they seem to know God. They seem to know the university, the universe, the university, the universe, and yet they choose to use it as a tool for their own selfish benefit. Um, which would go back to a political leader using his power for his own selfish benefit, right? Where you see all these different countries that do that with dictators. They get into that
Yes.
role, and so it's similar to that too. He is like a proto dictator here in this novel.
Yes, absolutely. A suzerain, in fact. And yeah, and like I
Yeah.
mean the first time we meet the judge is when he tricks everybody into thinking Reverend Green is some kind of pervert, right? And so that is awesomely hilarious. Like that really, and when, like when somebody like Rick Wallach recites that scene, you really feel the comedy in that scene. But
Yes.
um, that kind of like comic prank then becomes, like much more serious kind of lying and deception
And he's
as the.
told us who he is. He told us who he is in that part. You don't really realize it until you think about that opening intro to the judge, and then now he was actually just telling
Yes.
about himself
And
and that
actually,
he's a dangerous faith. He's the dangerous faith healer.
right, he's the dangerous one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when the judge actually accuses Reverend Green of being illiterate and secretly despising the thing that he pretends to be, pious
Mm.
about.
Hmm.
That actually is right out of Boehme's Sixth Theosophic Point, where the those who succumb to the darkness of the dark world and orient themselves to that
Hmm.
actually because falsehood is kind of the child of darkness, that they tend toward that kind of hypocrisy, right? Where
Hmm.
you actually despise the thing you're talking about.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so that's very funny.
Yeah, so I will agree with you 100% that Boma plays a much larger part. I think that McCarthy is quite familiar with Boma. And he explores the shadow self. That darkness, you can't get rid of darkness either. You're not supposed to have just light and fairy tales and unicorns. It is about understanding that there is darkness. And that's where the turn to compassion is, and for Jakob Bohm, it was very, very important to understand that it was non-duality and that compassion was the part that comes out of that. Anything else means you've missed it. And unfortunately, most of the literature on Gnosticism doesn't know what Gnosticism is, that it's non-duality. They literally do not ever define it as that. And it's a little lacking. Not that the work isn't interesting, it's just that it does change things when you know what Gnosticism is. It's related to the other ancient sacred practices. Uh, So,
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the non-duality can be in some way signaled by that Baroque word chiaroscuro,
yes.
which is light and shadow, right? And for Boma too, you're right. Like Boma is not about you must destroy the darkness and get to the light. Rather, you have to kind of follow the path that God lays out for himself in becoming manifest, which is you have to pass through the darkness and it doesn't actually evaporate. It in like the in the Baroque idea of the heavy foundation leading tapering up toward a lighter sort of upper floor as it were. This is sort of like what Boma is trying to get at, like light is, you only get light if fire burns,
Hmm.
but you need the burning. You need the
Hmm.
darkness of the fire burning, and you need the destruction of matter in order to kindle the fire. So you need anguish in your life. You need you need to feel the poison of contradiction, and because without contradiction, nothing will move or something like that. Maybe I'm now referencing Boehme's fan Friedrich Schelling more than Boehme himself, but there is that idea that darkness is not to be dissipated.
It's not to be
Um,
dissipated. That that's the light and dark, though, that is not a portrayal of non-duality. It's almost like a pre-step. It's like the breath beforehand. And we are going to talk about this next episode because we're going to be talking about literally a phrase that McCarthy uses in the novel and where it came from and where he was inspired from. And another mysterious part about understanding the novel. Chiaroscuro, yeah, it would not be a portrayal of non-duality because it's too identifying form. It's about the feeling of that more than anything, but it would be portray that would still be portraying duality.
right.
You know what I mean? It it's when that breaks down where non-duality would be. And now I just feel like I'm talking like an idiot. It's an experiential thing. That's the
I
problem.
understand.
Is it
Yeah.
that, we allowing ourselves to respect experientiality, and it's not science. It's not, something. It's much closer to philosophy, as you are saying, and
So
we can.
what do you want to leave
I guess
our
we're
listeners
almost ready,
with?
right? I know that we're
With
both
the
probably a little tired today, and
You want
I
to
think
leave
we
the listeners with, the teaser for the next episode? What is this phrase you're talking about?
optical democracy, which has probably been one of the most misunderstood things also in the literature around McCarthy's work in Blood Meridian. It's not easy to understand. It's definitely related to his LSD experiences, I'm sure. Um, I don't think that's been engaged enough with either over the years, that he came out and said he did LSD. And we could look at a number of things related to that sort of
Before it was
situation.
illegal.
Before it was illegal, he's very careful to say that. It's funny because, again, to Wes Morgan, I said, Wes, and I did in Knoxville when we were both in Knoxville a year and a half ago. I said, come on, don't you think? Because my presentation was kind of on which LSD did Cormac take, right? Was it Owls's from the Grateful Dead? Was it the CIA LSD, or was it which was Timothy Leary's LSD, or was it Sciences? But Wes Morgan confirmed that he did take it before he knew the exact date when it went illegal in Knoxville. And
Hmm.
actually, I asked Annie, his second wife was at that conference. And so I wanted to ask her, but I said, do you know anything about Cormac taking LSD? She goes, oh, yes, we took it together. And what happened was they went to their friend's lake house. They would go and spend some time there and have weekends there. And actually, Wes was helping me figure out whose house that was. We think it's the artist, Kidwell, that he did
Right.
that sculpture on the outside the library that saved it outside the library
Yeah.
in Knoxville. But anyway, she just told me her experience. So that was really cool. She goes, "Oh yeah, we took it," and I just felt like I was a young baby, safe in my mom in a fetal position. And I just love the idea of this group of people taking LSD at a lake house. It's just really marvelous, like in 1974 or something like that, or 1968. I don't know. I'll have to look up and see when it wasn't illegal.
That's
But
pretty
West
awesome.
did confirm that it was available and it wasn't when the legal date, which off the top of my head um, I can't remember when
So
it.
next episode is going to be really tripping.
I think it's going to be really tripping. Yeah,
Or
because I
tripping.
had notes for today on LSD and everything, so I'm going to save them for next time. Well, it's a poor man's way you certainly can have a coincidental experience of non-duality. Sometimes people happen when they go jogging or hiking in mountains. And, or we look at sublime paintings from the Germanic Northern painting series, and they would push themselves to go outside and have these profound, sublime experiences. Um, or you could take psychedelics, and, it's a little easier. It's definitely going to be guaranteed, but you want to be in a safe environment and maybe with a shaman or a guided session, which is available. Or you could be mentally ill. I mean, certainly some people would probably describe it as somewhat mentally
Mind-
loose. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Anyway, I certainly think that both Sutri and Blood Meridian are good examples of the acid experience. I think I had a note that Terence McKenna thought Finnegan's Wake was one of the best literary representations of an LSD trip. And I would add Blood Meridian to that.
Finnegan's Wake can be absolutely hilarious if you're in the
You,
right mindset,
you have to be in the right mindset. I just think
including
it's,
On LSD.
yeah. The internet has really helped Finnegan's Wake because you can find crypt notes everywhere. People have done so much work on it. I just don't know how you could read it by yourself. I was reading a little bit of it today and I was like, I feel like I'm in someone's kitchen's junk drawer. So annoyed because you have to stop and look up everything. But Blood Meridian can be that way too.
Well, Joyce was a maximalist
He
in writing,
was. He
and
was.
so is
Horror
Cormac
vacui.
McCarthy. And like, so who is going to be the Samuel Beckett to Cormac?
Right.
Because Samuel Beckett said, well, Joyce made it impossible to write like Joyce, so I have to
Yep.
go in the opposite direction. So I have to become a non-canner.
Yep.
I have to be, work with impotence and minimalism. And who is the, heir to Cormac McCarthy who will go in the opposite direction? Like that's gives me hope for the future, I guess.
Yes. Yes. Great. Great question.
Well, it was good to catch up, and
Thank you. Thank you.
congratulations on
Well,
almost finishing the tarot deck. You know,
congratulations on you too.
it is an incredible achievement. Like the cards are absolutely stunning
Thank you.
and beautiful, and as
Thank you.
somebody told you, exquisite, and I totally concur with that.
It was a lot of fun. Okay, and thank you everyone for listening. We really appreciate you.
We'll
Bye.
see you next time. Bye.
See you next time. Bye.